Ever wondered how medieval peasants kept their livestock alive through brutal winters that lasted 6 months, when a single dead cow meant starvation for the entire family? While we panic about rising feed costs, clever peasants developed feeding strategies so effective, their animals often survived harsh winters better than wealthy lords pampered livestock using expensive imported grain. Hay hoarding smart peasants began summer hay preparation like their lives depended on it because they did. Every sunny day meant cutting, drying, and storing grass from roadside ditches, forest clearings, and abandoned fields that cost nothing but labor. They built simple wooden frames to cure hay properly, preventing deadly mold that could kill animals faster than starvation. The best peasants stockpiled enough hay by August to feed their animals until March, calculating exactly how much each cow needed daily. Root storage underground root cellars became treasure vaults filled with turnips, carrots, and beets that provided essential vitamins during frozen months when fresh grass disappeared completely. Peasants harvested these root vegetables in late autumn, then layered them in sand-filled pits that prevented freezing while maintaining nutritional value. Turnips were particularly valuable because they grew in poor soil and stored for months without rotting. The smartest families grew extra roots specifically for animal feed, treating vegetables as livestock insurance. Kitchen scraps, medieval kitchens never threw away a single scrap of food, as every potato peel, bread crust, and vegetable trimming became valuable animal feed that could mean survival during harsh months. Housewives maintained dedicated slop buckets that collected apple cores, carrot tops, onion skins, and any food that humans couldn't eat. These scraps were carefully sorted. Moldy items went to pigs, who could handle spoiled food, while fresher scraps fed chickens and goats with more sensitive stomachs. The most organized families established feeding schedules, giving different animals specific types of kitchen waste on rotating days to maximize nutritional benefits. Bread scraps were particularly precious, since they provided carbohydrates that gave animals energy for warmth. Some clever peasants saved dishwater and cooking liquid, mixing these nutrient-rich waters with dry feed to create hearty soups for their animals. Acorn, fattening, September, and October became frantic acorn gathering seasons when entire families scoured oak forests to collect thousands of nuts that would fatten pigs and cattle through winter. Acorns contained enough fat and protein to sustain large animals for months, but only if gathered at the perfect time before squirrels and wild animals claimed them. Peasants developed efficient collection systems using baskets and cloth sacks, then stored acorns in dry lofts where they remained fresh until needed. Smart families taught children to identify the best acorn varieties, as some oak species produced nuts with higher nutritional content. Straw recycling. Nothing went to waste in medieval farms, especially wheat and barley straw that became essential. Winter feed. After grain harvest ended, peasants collected every stalk from their own fields, then negotiated with neighbors to gather leftover straw from larger harvests in exchange for future labor. They learned to mix straw with small amounts of grain waste, creating filling meals that stretched precious resources through hungry months. The clever ones soaked straw in warm water to soften tough fibers, making it easier for animals to digest and extract nutrients. Different animals received different straw preparations. Cattle got the roughest stalks, while sheep received finer, chopped pieces. Tree-feeding. Medieval peasants discovered that trees provided emergency winter feed when traditional sources ran out, stripping bark, cutting young branches, and harvesting leaves that could sustain animals during desperate times. Willow branches were cut and stored in bundles, providing fresh green material that animals craved during months of dried feed. Elm bark could be ground into flour-like powder that mixed with other feeds to stretch precious resources when food supplies dwindled dangerously low. Some tree species provided better nutrition than others. Leaves contained minerals that kept animals healthy, while birch bark offered vitamins that prevented diseases common in winter months. Peasants learned to harvest tree feed sustainably, cutting only what trees could spare without killing them for future years. The smartest families planned ahead, cutting and drying tree branches during autumn when sap content was highest and nutritional value peaked. During the worst winters, entire communities would strip certain trees completely, essentially eating the forest to keep their animals alive. Shared resources village communities created sophisticated sharing networks that ensured no family's animals starved while others had surplus feed, establishing cooperative systems that benefited everyone during challenging months. Neighbors pooled their resources, with families who had excess hay trading with those who had gathered more acorns or root vegetables. These arrangements weren't casual favors, but detailed agreements that specified exactly what each family contributed and received. Throughout winter, some villages established communal feed storage areas where everyone deposited surplus materials and withdrew what they needed, according to the number of animals they owned. The sharing extended beyond just feed families with better storage. Facilities housed feed for neighbors who lacked proper barns or cellars. Wealthier peasants who owned multiple animals often shared breeding stock with poorer families, creating partnerships where everyone benefited from successful animal reproduction. During the harshest winters, entire communities made collective decisions about which animals to keep alive and which to slaughter, prioritizing breeding stock and the most productive animals for community survival. These resource-sharing networks became so important that villages developed complex rules and penalties for families who hoarded resources while neighbors' animals starved. The most successful communities were those that perfected these cooperative systems, creating mutual aid that helped everyone survive winters that would have destroyed individual families. Brewery waste. Medieval ale production created mountains of nutritious grain waste that clever peasants transformed into premium animal feed, establishing relationships with brewers who were desperate to dispose of spent barley and wheat mash. After brewing, the leftover grain contained concentrated proteins and minerals that animals craved, especially during winter when their normal diet lacked variety and nutrition. Peasants would collect fresh brewing waste in carts, transporting it quickly before spoilage set in and turned valuable feed into dangerous poison. The fermented grain was actually easier for animals to digest than raw grain, acting like pre-processed feed that provided maximum nutritional benefit with minimal animal energy expenditure. Some peasants established regular collection schedules, with local brewers guaranteeing steady supplies of this premium feed throughout winter months when other resources became scarce. The waste was particularly valuable for dairy cows, as the high protein content increased milk production even during cold months when cows normally produced less. Smart peasants learned to mix brewery waste with other feeds, creating balanced meals that combined the protein from grain waste with the fiber from hay and straw. Villages near monasteries had access to particularly high-quality brewing waste, as monks used better ingredients and more careful brewing processes that produced superior leftover materials for animal feeding. Emergency slaughtered. Medieval peasants made brutal but necessary decisions about which animals to sacrifice and which to keep alive, developing strategic slaughter systems that maximized family survival during the most desperate winter months. They carefully evaluated each animal's contribution, keeping the best breeding stock, the highest milk producers, and the strongest work animals while sacrificing the weakest, oldest, and least productive members of their herds. The timing of emergency slaughter required precise calculation, as killing animals too early wasted potential productivity, while waiting too long meant animals would lose weight and provide less meat. Peasants became expert judges of animal condition, recognizing exactly when an animal had reached its maximum weight before winter starvation would reduce its value. The slaughter process was coordinated with neighbors to prevent waste, as fresh meat had to be consumed or preserved immediately before spoilage set in. Some communities established slaughter schedules that ensured fresh meat was available throughout winter, with different families sacrificing animals on rotating weeks. The hide, bones, and organs from slaughtered animals provided additional resources: leather for repairs, bones for tools, and organ meat for special animal feeds that provided essential nutrients. Blood from slaughtered animals was mixed with grain waste to create high-protein feeds for remaining livestock. The most strategic peasants used emergency slaughter as an opportunity to reduce their herd to exactly the number they could sustain through winter, calculating the perfect balance between keeping enough animals alive while having sufficient feed resources to maintain them in good condition. Indoor sheltering. Peasant families brought their most valuable animals directly into their homes during the worst winter weather, creating shared living spaces that conserved heat and ensured animals received constant care and feeding attention. Cows, goats, and chickens lived in attached sections of peasant houses, where body heat from large animals actually helped warm the human living areas while protecting livestock from deadly freezing temperatures. These arrangements weren't just about warmth, they allowed for more careful feeding management, as animals could receive small, frequent meals that maximized nutritional efficiency when feed was scarce. Indoor animals were fed kitchen scraps immediately while they were still fresh, reducing waste and ensuring optimal nutrition during critical winter months. The close proximity meant peasants could monitor animal health constantly, detecting problems early and providing immediate care that prevented minor issues from becoming fatal conditions. Some families constructed special indoor feeding areas with raised platforms that kept feed dry and clean, preventing spoilage that could kill animals quickly in winter conditions. Indoor sheltering also protected animals from predators that became more desperate during winter months, as wolves and other carnivores would attack weakened livestock when their natural prey became scarce. The warmest indoor areas were reserved for pregnant animals and nursing mothers, as successful reproduction during winter could mean the difference between prosperity and starvation in the following year. Smart peasants designed their houses with animal areas that could be sealed off during the coldest nights, creating microclimates that conserved precious body heat, while maintaining proper ventilation to prevent dangerous gas buildup from animal waste. Feed preservation. Medieval peasants developed ingenious techniques for keeping animal feed fresh and nutritious throughout long winter months.
When
Using
meadow
methods
plants had
that
reached
prevented
full
spoilage
growth but
without
hadn't yet
expensive
gone to
equipment
seed.
or artificial
Cut when the
preservatives,
dew has dried,
they
but
constructed
before the sun
elevated
has
storage
baked out the
platforms that
goodness.
kept hay
Storing
and
free
grain
feed for
off
winter
damp ground,
was perhaps the most
preventing
crucial
rot and
skill
mold
in
that
the
could turn
medieval
valuable
livestock
feed
keeper's
into
toolkit.
deadly poison
Identified
within
dozens
days.
of different plant species
Proper
by
ventilation
sight. These weren't
became
just
critical
random, but
as
still
peasants
attached
learned
the
to build
branches.
storage.
When winter
Areas
came,
with
these
gaps
leaf
that
bundles
allowed
called
air
tree hay
circulation
in some
while keeping
regions.
out rain
Nothing
and snow
says
that could
medieval
destroy
animal care.
entire
Come
winter
winter,
feed supplies. Salt preservation techniques extended beyond human food to animal feed, with peasants using small amounts of precious salt to preserve high-value feeds like brewery waste and kitchen scraps that would otherwise spoil quickly. Some families built underground storage chambers that maintained constant cool temperatures, creating natural refrigeration that kept root vegetables and fermented feeds fresh for months without freezing. Layering techniques prevented spoilage by separating different types of feed with straw or leaves, creating barriers that stopped rot from spreading through entire storage areas. The smartest peasants rotated their feed supplies constantly, using the oldest materials first while moving newer supplies to the back of storage areas. They learned to recognize early signs of spoilage-specific smells, color changes, and texture. Modifications that indicated feed was becoming dangerous to animals. Emergency preservation methods included smoking certain feeds over low fires, creating preserved materials that could last through extended cold periods when normal storage methods failed. Some peasants developed fermentation techniques that actually improved feed quality over time, creating aged feeds that animals preferred and that provided better nutrition than fresh alternatives. Community strategies. Entire medieval villages developed coordinated winter feeding strategies that pooled resources, shared knowledge, and created backup systems that ensured community survival when individual families faced disasters or resource shortages. Village elders established feeding schedules that rotated access to communal resources like mill waste, brewery leftovers, and shared grazing areas that provided supplemental nutrition during the hardest months. Communities organized collective gathering expeditions to forests and abandoned fields, with large groups working together to collect acorns, nuts, and wild plant materials that individual families couldn't harvest efficiently. The most organized villages maintained communal feed storage facilities, where surplus materials from good harvest years were preserved for communities to access during harsh winters when normal resources proved insufficient. Knowledge sharing became essential, with experienced peasants teaching younger families the secrets of successful winter feeding. Which combinations of feeds worked best, how to recognize spoiled materials, and when to make difficult decisions about animal slaughter. Villages established mutual aid agreements where families with specialized skills, animal medicine, feed preservation, or efficient storage techniques, shared their expertise in exchange for labor or materials from neighbors. Emergency protocols were developed for extreme situations, including community-wide decisions about rationing scarce resources and coordinating relief efforts when individual families faced complete feed shortages. Some villages created rotating responsibility systems where different families took turns caring for community breeding stock, ensuring that essential animals received optimal care even when individual owners lacked resources. The most successful communities developed long-term planning strategies that anticipated harsh winters years in advance, establishing multi-year feed storage systems and breeding programs that could sustain the entire village through extended periods of extreme weather and resource scarcity. These medieval peasants weren't just keeping animals alive, they were mastering winter feeding strategies, so effective that modern homesteaders are rediscovering them today to cut feed costs by 80% while producing healthier livestock. While we rely on expensive commercial feeds, they turned waste into wealth and created community feeding networks that ensured no animals starved even during the harshest winters. The most shocking part? Many of these medieval winter feeding techniques work better than modern methods and cost absolutely nothing to implement. You could start using medieval waste recycling, community resource sharing, and emergency feeding strategies immediately to slash your feed bills. Modern homesteaders using these methods report healthier animals and dramatically reduced costs compared to commercial feeding systems. Want to master these medieval winter feeding secrets that kept entire herds alive during ice ages? Subscribe for our complete guide to zero-cost animal feeding strategies that actually work when modern systems become too expensive. Don't let rising feed costs bankrupt your operation when centuries of proven winter feeding wisdom is waiting to transform your livestock management forever.